Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this weekly ag weather forecast for AgSouth Farm Credit and Ag Carolina Farm Credit. I want to start you off with some new research that was just released here on May 27th, and it goes back to an event that happened in January of 2022. If you remember, there was a large volcano that erupted east of Australia, the Tonga eruption, and one of the things we talked a lot about it was the large increase in stratospheric water vapor, which is what this diagram shows, that happened because of that volcano. Remember, it increased stratospheric water vapor load by about 10%. Now, the reason why we're thinking a lot about this is because this new paper that just came out, which is here, has brought up possibly some new longer range forecast implications. I've taken you to the 23rd page of this particular presentation. This was published in the journal Climate by 3 different scientists out of Australia. Journal Climate is a prestigious journal. It's one that I respect. And they're just looking at the potential implications of this longer term, next 3 to 7 years. Now, I have not yet fully read this paper. I will do that. And if there's something of consequence in this that is important to show you, we're definitely going to do that. But I just wanted to bring that to your attention. I thought it'd be good, since it's May 31st, to also go back and do a little bit of forecast verification. Because here's what's interesting. If you remember back to my weather forecast in April, we were showing this, well, if you just used all the years that had an El Nino in winter, that faded into spring and was gone by summer, this is what happened in the May that was in between. It was warmer in the Northwest most of those years, cooler in Texas into the Northeast, and then drier in the Midwest, wetter in the Southeast. And about the Southeast is the only place that played out according to this. This was a terrible, terrible analog forecast. I'm just going to be honest with you. It was bad. Who else was forecasting it? Well, the CPC did as well. This is what they released back on April 30th. They did a much better job. I mean, they picked up on the drought that developed in Florida. They've seen the dryness that has crept out of Mexico into New Mexico. And they picked up on this wetter corridor right in through here, which overall was a pretty solid forecast, as was the above average temperatures. The European model, not too good. Did do well on this area, but we were extremely wet early in May down here across parts of the south and southeast. That was not well resolved by the models, because this is what actually happened. If you take a look at the climate reporting districts in AgSouth and Ag Carolina territory, most of this has had a top 30 wettest May on record. Some places have been in the top 5. And lately we've seen some really, really heavy rains get through parts of the Mid-South over into the Carolinas. And what this did was this erased some April drought worries we had in North Carolina, Virginia. That's gone. And it's really just come through here and saturated things. Now, I'll show you that soil moisture in a few moments, but I want to think just on the whole about how wet of a May this has been, because it's not just affected us. It's affected this part of the Mid-South, big section here of the Western and Central Corn Belt. In fact, I'm sure you've heard a lot about Iowa's troubles with extremely heavy rainfall. And on top of all of this, we've just had a tremendous amount of severe weather. I thought it was interesting to make a map, and it's a little too busy. I'm sorry, I made it this morning, but it looks at the percent of average rainfall during May. And we just kind of take a closer look here. We've got a lot of places that are 150 to up to 300% of normal on precip. Now, this is going to go down as one of the wetter Mays on record for the country, but we need to watch this, because coming out of Mexico, there is drought, and it seems to be pushing its drier air at times into this part of the country. It's actually influencing why it's been so dry in Florida as well. There's a big area of high pressure that's living down here, and we have to just understand where that high pressure might go as we move forward. And I'm going to give you some information about that at the end of this video. But keeping on this theme of just looking back, I also wanted to point out that while we had about normal amount of sunshine during the month of May, there are a few places that have seen deficits. This is a cumulative downward solar flux anomaly map. And what that means is this map measures, compared to average, how much of the sun's light got to the surface. So very little of it here in eastern Texas, where it's even storming this morning. Look across the Canadian Prairie and Ontario and Quebec, a lot of cloud cover. You're going, wait a minute, didn't you just say that it was really wet in parts of the Midwest? Yes, it has been. But we've had a lot of overnight rains. We've had a lot of storm systems that have persisted overnight. And the storm has been blowing up late in the day at times, which means we've gotten some sunshine in here to fuel the atmosphere up for that. So very interesting and mixed bag going on in the Midwest. I just want to keep you aware of that as you're growing competing crops here in parts of the Southeast. Soil moisture-wise, at the beginning of the month, there it is. That was the drought we were worried about at the beginning of May, and now we look at it and it's been wiped out. We've got more problems with too much water in the soil in places than we have a lack. Now, that's not to take away from what's going on in Kansas and Oklahoma, the drier parts of western Texas, the drought that's building into Florida. But it's showing that overall it's been a pretty wet spring for much of the country. Now, while AgSouth and Ag Carolina right now don't have a lot of rivers showing up in the action or the minor, moderate, or major flood stages, I just want to take note that some of the major river systems here in the central United States and then these down here in Texas are currently flooding. Just to keep you up to speed on this, the Mississippi River is about 21 feet above low stage. That is 22 feet above low stage. So this means the river is open and flowing, and it's got quite a bit more water coming into it. And I did check yesterday what was going on in the Panama Canal, and the lake is still about 6 feet lower than we want it to be, but it's probably going to be filling up in the next 4 to 6 months, which means the Panama Canal should return back to full capacity. Now, I made something for you here that I hope you find interesting. I'm going to blow this up a couple of times so you can see it. I wanted to go way back. This is January 7th of 2020, and I wanted to watch the evolution of drought over the last 4 years. So we're playing through 2020 where most of the drought was building in the west, right? By the time we got into winter, we had a couple of pockets down here that were drier in Georgia. We then play into 2021, and we started to get dry along the coast. Remember that in summer 2021, we were watching huge drought in the west and huge drought developing over North Carolina, parts of South Carolina, and Virginia. But then we got into fall and wiped a lot of that out while the heat and drought just continued to build into the west. We then get into winter of 2021 into 2022. Again, we're struggling with some drier conditions here. But as we play forward throughout the year in 2022, finishing it, we saw dryness in the south, but overall, most of the major drought episodes of the last 4 years have avoided the southeast. Now, that's not to say you haven't had drought, but I'm saying major drought episodes, according to the Drought Monitor, have missed us. Now, let's get into 2023. This is the end of 2023 as we saw this really dry air moving into this area. Exceptional drought here at the southern part of the Mississippi Valley. But watch this as I play the last bit of this slower. Into November, December. This is January, February, March, April, and now to May. And right now across the United States, we've got about 12% of the land area in some form of drought. And this map just lines up with what I showed you. It's here, and a little bit in the northwest. Most of AgSouth, Ag Carolina Farm Credit territory is off the Drought Monitor. What's interesting about this is, I want to show you this. This is for the whole country, but our NDVI values early this spring, because of how wet things have been on the whole, is well above average. That's this line right here. The year that would take the cake as the wettest would be 2019, also having the highest NDVI value. Now, as a consequence of this really wet pattern, we've had a lot of severe weather. And so far, we're at 138% of normal on the year for tornadoes, about 112% of average on hail reports, and 166% of normal on wind reports. And the month of May was very busy, and you can see a lot of our reports here coming in the month of May. Now, thinking about this as we go forward, I just want to show you lately a lot of the severe weather, let's shrink that up a bit, has been here. And we've had a lot of hail reported in the southern plains. This is hitting this part of the Cotton Belt pretty hard. And if we look back at the last 72 hours, while much of AgSouth, Ag Carolina territory has been on the drier side of this, you had a system that exited toward our north. All the strong to severe storms have been in the southern plains. We just want to ask, when is some of the moisture going to be coming back into our area? And I'll tell you, where we've seen the storms lately, like this was through last night, we can see just large storms erupting in the plains of the United States, and we're going to see them continue to stay there for the next few days before rain starts to push into our area. But I bring you to this image, because I want you to see the wildfire smoke in Mexico, in the Bay of Campeche, where humidity levels down here are about 15 to 30% lower than what average is. Tuck that away in the back of your mind for a few moments, because I'm going to come back to that here as we think about what this could mean going farther into this summer. Okay, from here, biggest storms are here. And we want to know, when are these storms which are rolling through the southern plains going to get to us? Because as we look today, this would be the 31st, we are not in the Storm Prediction Center's severe storm risk, nor are we in it tomorrow either. This would be the first. Getting into the weekend, this would be the second. A lot of the severe weather is here. And that's largely because of where the flow is set up. We're not yet fully into where these troughs are coming into our area. They're mostly north or they're mostly west. So when can we start to see some storms getting into our region? Well, let's get into a bit of a forecast for this. High-res NAM model, we're going to focus on the southeast. This is starting this morning on Friday. And we just noticed that throughout the day today, our storm threat stays pretty far to our west. And we kind of stay in the clear for storms going through the day on Friday. Getting into Saturday morning, playing through midday Saturday, and getting towards Saturday evening, that system that's over Texas now just starts to push its way toward the Appalachian Mountains and toward the southeast. But this is through 9 p.m. on Saturday night. And as the models are going here, we're not looking at much of a chance of rainfall at all during that time frame. Once we play into the day on Sunday, we're going to keep a close eye on the Blue Ridge Mountains, the Appalachian Mountain chain, for some wetter weather here. But this is through early Sunday morning, getting into Sunday afternoon, and it's just still not bringing widespread precipitation toward us. So when does that break down? When do we get a return of moisture? Because while most of May was wet, we've settled into a little bit of a drier pattern here to finish this week, and it shows that the weekend, starting next week too, is a bit drier as well. I want to give you 5 models to consider. The first is the artificial intelligence forecasting system. I see wet weather northwest, wet weather through the Canadian Prairie, wet and wet, but overall, our area not looking at high chances of being extremely wet. I mean, we're in this part of the color bar here, not looking at these big rainfall events sneaking through. The national blend of models continues over the next 7 days to give us a bit more of a drier risk. As you saw, the farther west you go, the better the chances are of getting some wetter conditions. This is the WPC. It's not to say that it's completely dry. We will get some isolated storms out of this and some showers rolling through, but it's not an overly wet week. Some of the other models, though, like the European model, tries to bring in at the end of the time period better rainfall. And I'll show you where this is coming from here. And the GFS isn't that far off from it as well. So while the artificial intelligence is on the drier side, the national blend of models in the WPC are showing much drier. Seems as though the ECMWF and the GFS are a bit wetter. So overall, we have to assess what's guiding this. And I'm going to give you kind of some big pieces that I'm watching going forward before I get into the models. So take a look at this. This is the upper level pattern right now on Friday. Okay, why are all the storms here? Well, that's where the weak trough is. We've actually got flow in the upper levels coming out of the north and west. That's preventing us from getting the moisture in place. Anytime you're on the back side of a trough, it's dry. Okay, as we play this forward into the weekend and get into next week, where's all the action go back to? Here. See, the flow is strongest here into early next week. But watch this. This is on June the 4th. By June the 5th, 6th, and 7th, here you go. See this ridge building in? If that ridge builds in and drops a trough over the Great Lakes, there'll be a front that'll sit right there. Excuse me. And if that front, pardon me there, sits right in this area, that's going to start by, late next week, giving us better chances of getting some rainfall. And we want to know how long this ridge is going to be here, because this pattern, building a ridge into the west, is a complete pattern reversal over what we've seen for the last 6 weeks. The atmosphere has not wanted to drop troughs here, it's wanted to drop them into the west. And as a result, we've had the May pattern I described to you at the beginning of this video. So through the 7th, 8th, 9th, and even out there to the 10th, we see this going on. And this trough gets deeper and deeper, meaning cooler air in here. And to the south of it, we're going to have a parked front. There'll be a front that'll live there. We may get some better moisture out of that front. Now, you notice that by the 10th, we start to see things shifting around a bit. The 11th and 12th, this gets out. And that means heat's going to try to return toward the middle of the month. But that one shift right here, this, is pushing a lot of heat west, starting next Thursday, Friday, and lasting all the way through like Sunday the 9th, 10th, 11th. And that's going to give us cooler air in this trough right in through this area and the chance for more rainfall. Now, I want to know if the models are wrong with this and that they're not trying to, after the 10th and 11th, break this ridge down. And I'm going to just keep that in the back of my mind, because next week when I forecast for you, we need to pay attention to see if this ridge is still in the west, because that will definitely dictate our precipitation and temperature patterns. So now let's go back to the models and see what they say. GFS left, European right. Now we know that getting through Friday into Saturday, it's going to be Saturday night into Sunday where the front tries to get here and line up on the Appalachian Mountains. But it's this high pressure cell that's keeping it away from just blasting through. So where do we go? Well, this is into Monday, some scattered storms possible. Sunday night and a Monday, that's always there in the forecast. But most of the action is here, or it's in the northwest. So this is Monday into Tuesday of next week. Now watch. I want you to keep an eye on this guy right here. Here we are on Tuesday getting into Wednesday. We have chances midweek next week for some scattered storms. But that trough that came in the northwest lands here, and it's going to dive into the eastern Great Lakes. So here's Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Now, that's when the trough is in place. This is when the ridge builds into the west. And as I mentioned, to the south, there will be a front. And that's when our better chances late next week start to increase with rainfall. And if that front stays there, you notice that we could get into a weekend where, depending on the position of the front, we could see storms. And now you're going, wait a minute, it says white. I don't see anything here. I'm just telling you, if you drop a trough into this area, it's going to leave a front somewhere. And it might be sitting over AgSouth territory, increasing our chances for some rain. But what you did see is that most of the next week, until we get into late next week, we're drier. And that's why even over the next 10 days, the chances of getting over an inch of rain are not high here. There are going to be some local storms that pop up and some showers. You saw that. But it's not as though we have this really high chance of getting wet conditions. So most of the areas, 50 to 70% chance, at least up here in Virginia, North Carolina, of getting over an inch. And we're lower as you get farther into the southeast. Okay, so if that's our near term, where do we think it's going to go beyond that? Well, take a look. This is the new week 2 forecast from the CPC. This is the European model, and there's the GFS. Now, I've told you the GFS has a really strong dry bias for the southeast. But here's what I think is going to happen. The ridge sets up in the west, giving northwest flow here. There'll be a trough of low pressure that'll live in this area, and it's going to leave a lingering front somewhere in here. And that's why you see wetter here and possibly wetter there with the dry air coming in. Dry air coming in, possibly wetter in this area. So I would tell you of all three of the maps to look at, let's come over here. The CPC's outlook seems to make the most sense to me looking out there into week 2. So does that you kind of see where the pattern's going here in the near term? Very tricky as things start to transition. Temperature-wise, early this morning on Friday, we actually had some frosty conditions in parts of the northeast and in the northwest, telling you that this pattern is volatile. Looking at frost over the next 7 days, it is important to note that we could, early this morning, it may have already happened, get a little bit of a frost right here into the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia. But our temperatures overall, take a look. Here's Friday, we're cooler than average. Getting into Saturday, cooler than average by a few degrees. It's just upper 70s, low 80s. We love this, but it's still cooler than average. This is Sunday into Monday. See, Monday is when we start to get a little bit of warmer air back in. Tuesday into Wednesday. But this is only a degree or two warmer than average. The heat is all the way over here. And the concern is as we start to build in all of that heat into the west around the 6th and the 7th and the 8th, as the excessive heat watches and warnings pile up in this area, I want to know what this does to this whole region around the Great Lakes. Because as it stands, maybe into Florida we get hot, maybe into southern Georgia, but I think you're going to see a pretty strong temperature contrast in this area. This is what I mean. If you get out there day 5 through 10, there's all that heat. Here's the cooler weather. Right in through there is going to be a boundary parked. You get south of it, it's going to be hot. North of it, we're expecting closer to normal. And this is day 10 through 15. And the European model agrees. Do you see this day 5 through 10? Where's it got all the heat? In the west. Deeper trough of cooler air here, but there's that boundary. You get south of that boundary, better chances of being hot. You're north of it, cool. And that's what's going to be tricky about the day 5 through 10 and then day 10 through 15 forecast. So heat and heat just south of that line. This is where the front could be, though, and that's why I think the week 2 pattern is possibly wetter for us. Okay, if you're looking at this going, Eric, this seems like you're uncertain. I am very uncertain as to how this transitions. You want to know why? Big thing. This entire pattern is being set up in the Pacific, not in the Atlantic. And because we don't have a strong signal coming out of the Atlantic, it's becoming very challenging to figure out where this is going to go. Because I'm also not getting a lot of help from the MJO. You know, some times of the year we can really use the MJO to know where things are. Well, it's collapsing back here into null space. That's not a good signal. So I have to look and just say, well, what's the Atlantic doing to offset the Pacific? Because the Pacific is giving us this. And this is what's most important about this pattern, it was that big warm area that was forcing the jet stream over the top to dive down and roll like this, giving us all the severe weather. Now, over the next week, we're watching heat build into somewhere that it's not been. And it's going to temporarily break this down. But did you know that during this entire time period in the Atlantic, the Bermuda High, which normally sits here, part of it's been over the Hudson Bay and part of it's been over Scandinavia? It's gone. But the reason why we haven't had the influence of that is because of how dominant the Pacific pattern's been. But I've noticed that the Pacific Ocean, while its temperature pattern's got a lot of cool water here and La Nina's really beginning to flex, that the Pacific Ocean is getting so much attention while the Atlantic has slowly warmed up. Do you remember back in April when this whole area was cool? It's gone. And this is going to be an important thing to think about going forward. Now, let's get into that. First of all, what's going on with La Nina? It's getting stronger. The Southern Oscillation Index is building. And if the more positive it goes, the more of the indication of the strong trade winds we begin to see in these certain indices. Now, thinking about that going forward, I want to know what it's going to do to this. So at the beginning, I told you about an active May. This is why May was active. This large complex of high pressure, there's one there, and there's one here. Sorry, trying to draw some H's with my fingers, has got the flow doing this. Bermuda High is supposed to live here. Part of it is there, part of it is here. Now, what's going to happen in this part of the Atlantic Ocean? And is the Pacific going to continue to do this? That's what we're trying to assess and answer. Right now, the forecast from June 7 to July 7, honestly, it's got stormy conditions along the East Coast. It's trying to take a ridge out of Mexico and push it into the Central Plains, giving more of flow like that coming over the top, which tends to be stormy for the Southeast. There are a few different models that are suggesting this, one of them being the CFS V2 model. It just recently, from mid to late June, there's the 14th to the 20th, the 21st to the 27th, tries to bring more cascading storms into our area. So if you say, well, Eric, are we going back into drought? I don't have indications that that's going to be the case. In fact, my biggest worry about drought is here. It's the drought that's been developing in Central America and into Mexico. And I think that's going to be pushing into this region with time. We've got a lot of moisture already in our area. There's plenty of moisture to be recycled. And if you look again at those ocean temperatures, this is so warm in this area that there seems to be plenty of, evaporation in the lower atmosphere that could be pushed into, the southeast. This is also something we got to worry about for the upcoming hurricane season. So let's kind of finish this up with that discussion. We'll do a little bit of international weather, and then we'll wrap this up, because next week we'll have new long-range data to kind of show you. So I want to give you this. This is a model called the JMA. The JMA is a Japanese model. It's a June through August forecast. Now, as it stands, let's just get right to the main thing here. It does not have, this would be the wetter side of average. It doesn't have us going into drought. It's not showing that. What I'm curious about is this. It's trying to put a lot of rising motion over Africa June through August. Now, we have to care about that, because if there's a lot of rising motion here, that's kind of one side of the map versus the other, this is going to be critical to using the heat that's in the Atlantic to start to push us toward what could be an active summer thunderstorm time frame, followed by an active hurricane season. Because if you just say that in July, the MJO lives over Africa, there's no blocking in this. Like, I don't see any big southeastern ridge. And you know how much I'm worried about a southeastern ridge. What about later? If it gets into phase 2, still no big southeast blocking ridge to talk about. What I'm concerned about is if that sets up, what this could eventually do to just lighting this area up with some early tropical cyclone activity. That is going to be what's front of mind for me as we think out there about this summer pattern. Now, last week's video, I covered for you all of the long-range models, so we're not going to do that again. If you want to go see it, go see it. You can go back there and look at that forecast. What I want to know is this warmth in the North Atlantic going to be influential for our summer thunderstorm pattern? When is the Bermuda High going to be coming back? And what is this going to mean as we progress farther into summer? I don't have any indications of a big southeast ridge. And that's my point I want to make. Okay, going forward with all of this, some international stuff. The flooding in Rio Grande do Sul has ended. We're a bit wetter throughout Australia, actually, in the near term. But keep a close eye on the Russian wheat belt. This has been in the news a lot lately. Some of the models are attempting to bring a little different projection here. Some of the models are trying to bring some storms into that area. But some of them are trying to keep it drier in pockets. And one thing we do know is it's going to be extremely hot in that area going forward as well. I think there could be an interesting story coming out of Russia as we progress into summer that we have to pay attention to. Okay, that was a lot to digest on a Friday, and I hope you had a coffee in your hand as you listened to this. But I want you to know a lot of things are in transition, and I'm watching them, and I'll keep you posted on how these things play out in my next video next week. Have a good one. Thanks.